to our webinar entitled Tourism and Hotel Industry, Slow Road to Recovery in partnership with Cushman Wakefield. Before we begin, I think you've had a chance to meet our Deputy Mayor, John Hamilton, so we thank him for joining us today. Of course, thank Councillor Khalid Usman for joining us as well. He is our Vice Chair of the Culture and Economic Development Committee, and he's also sits on the board of the new tourism organization for Markham called Destination Markham. We, I believe, are expecting Councillor Ho, who will join us very shortly. And we also have Arvind Prasad, our Commissioner of Development Services, who will be joining us. I believe Regional Councillor Lee also will be joining us during the webinar. So today's agenda will begin with some quick remarks from the Chair and Vice Chair of our Economic Development and Culture Committee. And then we'll get right into the keynote presentation by Brian Flood, and Councillor Usman will be introducing Brian in a couple of minutes. We'll do our Q&A after the main presentation, and then I'll make some brief closing remarks. So just before we begin, I wanted to share some quick housekeeping items. Please use the chat function to send any questions. You can send your questions anytime during the presentation, but the presenters will address questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The meeting is being recorded, and the presentation will be available on demand. And also what we've been doing is Sandra Tam, my colleague, who is a Senior Business Development Officer in our department, who's the star of our team and co-host today. She'll be sending a follow-up note with a copy of the presentation. And please bear with us in case there are any technical challenges where we should be fine. We've had a few of these now, but every now and again, there is a glitch or two. So bear in mind that also if you can turn your videos off and set yourself on mute, that also helps to preserve the bandwidth. Okay, and with that, Sandra, do we have Councillor Ho on the line yet? Okay, so maybe Councillor Khalid Usman, Vice Chair of our Economic Development and Culture Department, perhaps you can give your remarks and then we'll go right to our keynote speaker.
Well, thank you, Christina and Sandra. I really appreciate. I'm sure Alan is going to join us shortly. But I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule, because I think this topic is very, very important. The series of webinars hosted by the city's Economic Growth, Culture and Entrepreneurship Department have been very well attended, and some of you have joined us before. As a board member of the newly established Destination Markham Corporation, today's topic is close and dear to my heart. I hope you'll all find this discussion useful. Destination Markham is a city's destination marketing organization focused on building Markham as a destination for visitors. We have a new board made up of industry representatives, many of whom are participating on this webinar today. The hotel and tourism industry is an integral part of the Markham community. We all know how hard this industry has been hit by this pandemic. Today, we hope to draw on Brian's insight and expertise to help us become better informed and help us facilitate the recovery of this important industry. Brian is, what can I say? I mean, he's so well known, but I'm going to try to see if I can do justice to his experience. Brian has provided advisory and valuation services to the hospitality industry for over 30 years and leads the hospitality and gaming group at Cushman and Wakefield in Canada. His consulting practice includes marketing and feasibility studies, appraisals, development strategies, litigation support, and other associated with tourism and hospitality industry. Brian brings 35 years of commercial and real estate experience and has specialized in the valuation of hospitality assets for over 30 years. Brian has completed assignments across a wide range of assets, including major downtown, hotels, resorts, conference centers, and limited service properties. He has acted for Canadian, Asian, European, and US lenders, private owners, publicly traded companies, institutions, and government bodies. So please welcome Brian Flood. Brian?
Good afternoon, and thank you for that kind introduction. As mentioned, our group is a group that specializes in hospitality. We're part of Cushman Wakefield, which I'm sure most people know is a major commercial services provider in the real estate industry. We have offices coast to coast, and we do provide valuation and consulting services coast to coast as well. Our group is comprised of 8 consultants, and we're based out of Toronto and Vancouver. And we do assignments from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria, BC, and everything in between. And as mentioned, we cover pretty much every type of asset, from major downtown hotels to smaller limited service properties. Joining me today is Videsh Johan, who works with me in the Toronto office. So Videsh is actually the person who was instrumental in putting the presentation together. And Videsh is our facts and figures person. So if I misspeak or get something wrong, he will jump in and correct me. So good to have Videsh here with me as well. So we'll start on the presentation. I'm going to jump off video, and then Videsh will walk us through the slides, and I'll just provide the commentary as we go along. So we will cover different aspects. I think it's important to understand where the industry was before we went into the COVID period. I think you have to have an understanding of how deep the impact has been on this industry before you can really begin to understand what the recovery looks like. So we'll talk about the impact on the travel sector, the hotel industry, what that's doing to hotel performance. We'll speak as well to what's happening locally in the GTA. We'll also talk about what the implications are on operations for hotels. So the way hotels operate has changed, and we think some of those changes will be long-lasting into the future. And then we'll get into our discussion on recovery, what the forecast, what the recovery period looks like. And then we'll talk a little bit about what some of the implications are in terms of new additions to supply, or how supply may change, how we may see some new development delayed, or we may actually see some hotels come out of supply in some markets as the market begins to recover. So I think it's important to know that the industry came out of a decade of unprecedented growth. So after the credit crisis in 2009, we saw tremendously strong growth across all hotel sectors across the country, with the exception of Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland. They were impacted by the downturn in oil, but pretty much every other market across the country finished 2019 at record occupancy, with record average rates and record profitability. So going into 2020, I think the outlook was for maybe the economy to soften a little, but certainly nobody anticipated what would happen in March. So the impact on hotels, one thing with hotels from an investment perspective is that, hotels are impacted immediately. So if there's an event, say 9/11 or SARS or the credit crisis, hotels feel the impact right away. If you're an investor in office or retail, your income is secured by leases, and those leases generally will continue along. In hotels, it's almost like somebody turns off the tap, and overnight your business will disappear. So just to give you an idea of what the impact has been, I've outlined some bullet points here. So 65% of all borders were closed to international tourism. The Canada Border Services Agency reported air travel down by 91 and 95% in June and July. Passenger volumes at all the major airports is down by over 90%. Airlines are projecting, or Air Canada until very recently and WestJet have been operating their schedules at about 25% capacity. I know where I live, I'm used to hearing jets flying over all day long, and you sort of look upwards at the sky now when you hear a jet. So even on that Toronto to Montreal route, it's been cut back pretty significantly. In markets like Vancouver and Halifax and some of the other smaller ports around the country, cruise ships have stopped, and that's going to continue through October 31st, so effectively for the rest of the year. Via Rail has also suspended service, and Greyhound as well. So when you see those kind of cutbacks in travel, obviously the impact on hotels will be significant. And so you can see here the downturn. So we were able to get information on different regions around the world, China, Europe, the Middle East, and the US. So you can see China came into February. Their numbers were already down significantly because they were in the throes of the virus, and they had very severe travel restrictions in place. And so they were running at about 10% occupancy through till March, and then they began to see a little bit of recovery. In North America and Europe and the Middle East to a lesser extent, our impact really came through that mid part of March. Very significant drop-offs in occupancy. You can see Europe declined to 10%, and have only actually just recovered to about 25%. We don't have numbers beyond June 27th. We do understand that there is more pickup as some of these markets begin to open up. But as of the end of June, you can see those occupancy rates, which are significantly below where they would normally be. And interestingly, you can see China actually beginning to fall off a little after making a strong recovery. And I think that is partially due to outbreaks in certain parts of the country. Next slide. So this chart shows the drop in revenue for hotels. So RevPAR is a term that we use, and what that refers to is revenue per available room. So what we're showing here is the percentage drop as compared to 2019. And so in March, it was down a little at the beginning of the month, but by the time we got into the beginning of April, revenues were down 80 to 90% for hotels across the country. And you can see a very gradual pickup starting in June and then into the first week of July. So very, very gradual pickup. But as you can see, hotels are still operating far, far below where they normally would at this time of year. For hotels, we looked at it as well based on the type of hotel. And the hotels that have really been impacted the most are luxury hotels and upper upscale. Now, a lot of those properties are located in city center markets, downtown markets. So for example, in Toronto, it would be hotels like the Ritz and the Shangri-La and hotels like that, five-star properties. And they've felt the impact more than anyone else. In fact, in downtown Toronto, the Ritz closed in March. I don't believe it's reopened. The St. Regis closed. There's been quite a number of luxury hotels closed. And the reason is because a lot of those hotels are dependent on international travel and conferences. And conferences have stopped and international travel has stopped. And so this is why we see this huge decline from where they normally would be. Interestingly, it's limited service properties that are performing better than most. Again, it's really by virtue of their location and the profile of the customers. So they appeal more to budget conscious travelers, people that are driving the highways. So we are hearing of pickup in demand from those types of travelers. Downtown markets are continuing to struggle, and we think that will probably continue for a little while longer. In terms of the local GTA market, we put together numbers going back to 2007. And again, just to put this in context, I mean, this will give you an idea of the type of decline that we've seen. You'll see that blip on the left is 2009. That was the credit crisis. And, you know, certainly it was a difficult time. But if you look at the drop in terms of the percentage or just the drop in dollar amount of revenue per available room, it is dramatic. And the biggest decline, as you can see, is in the downtown hotels. So they've dropped from a revenue per available room of just under $200 to $75. So that is a dramatic decline. Toronto Northeast, where is the submarket that Markham falls within, and that's gone from about $100 to about $50 up until the beginning of, to the end of May of this year. So again, a dramatic drop, but not as bad as what we've seen in some of these downtown markets. So for the month of June, we looked at the numbers for the various submarkets. We looked at Ontario as a whole, Toronto Downtown, Toronto Northeast, and Toronto Airport and West. And interestingly, of the three major Toronto submarkets, Northeast actually leads in terms of occupancy and in terms of RevPAR. So it's a $100 rate, but combined with the occupancy, the revenue per available room is actually higher in the Northeast market. I mean, compare that to downtown Toronto at 8% occupancy at a $138 rate. I mean, these numbers are startling, to say the least. So the Northeast market actually is outperforming all the Toronto submarkets and also outperforming the province as a whole. So it's still pretty dismal, but it's certainly better than some other markets have done. So in terms of the changes to hotels and how they're operating, you know, hotels, I have to say, have been really done a terrific job in addressing COVID and changing how they operate. I think the major hotel chains have really made huge effort to reassure customers that, you know, staying at their hotels is safe. A lot of this is really about consumer confidence, and so it's really important for hotel chains to restore that confidence, for people to feel that it's safe to stay. So things like, you know, screenings, temperature checks, masks, these are all standard now. You know, mobile check-in. So we had that before, but hotel chains are making greater use now of technology, mobile check-in and out, contactless payment or prepayment. In terms of guest rooms, you know, they've made changes there. They're doing more deep cleaning. They're leaving rooms vacant for, in some cases, 2 or 3 days. They're putting limits on the number of rooms they rent. They're closing off sections of the hotel. Knock and drop room service. And even things that were provided in the rooms before have been cleared out, and some things are now just available on request. For restaurants and bars, you know, we're not experts in restaurant operations, but you know, and the restaurant industry has also suffered tremendously through this. But in the context of hotels, they are doing enhanced cleaning. There's capacity restrictions. You've seen where you know, outdoor patios now have reopened with spacing. So these changes will stay in place for quite some time. I guess one question that a lot of people have is, what about conferences and events? That business has really taken a huge hit, and it's not clear whether or not those types of events will even occur this year. With the restrictions on group sizes and physical distancing, what we've seen are events that were canceled in the spring and now early summer were rescheduled for the fall, but I think we'll probably see a lot of those events actually rescheduled into 2021. So that sector, we think, will take a little bit longer to come back. In terms of the recovery, one thing we look very closely at is the overall trend in the economy. And one of the factors we look at is GDP. So we are confident, notwithstanding where we are today, we are confident that the industry will recover. We've been through downturns every decade or so, and the industry has always come back. I think underlying this is the outlook for the economy as a whole. So seeing significant drops, obviously, in GDP in 2020, most in the 5%, 6%, 7% range. But also groups like the Conference Board and the major banks are projecting a very strong recovery in 2021. So combined, I think, with the hopefully with the discovery of a vaccine and distribution of the vaccine and the pickup in economic recovery, we do think that hotels should be back to 2019 levels in the next 2 to 3 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the next few slides. So I think initially a lot of people thought we'd have a V-shaped recovery. That increasingly looks remote. And again, I think a lot of it just has to do with consumer confidence coming back. So it's people feeling comfortable staying in hotels again. That's going to take a little bit of time. And I think it's also going to take a little bit of time before people feel comfortable traveling, particularly by plane from city to city. Air Canada, in fact, was predicting a 3-year recovery to get back to its 2019 global capacity. And unfortunately, I heard the chairman of Delta Airlines, I think yesterday, was saying that there's a bit of a question mark about whether or not business travel ever gets back to the same level. But I think, again, it's really all about consumer confidence. The Conference Board believes that we'll see domestic travel recover in early 21 and international travel in late 21. Smith Travel, which is an industry information provider, project now that we'll see strong growth in 21, which ties in with that recovery in economic growth. We do think leisure travel will pick up in 2020. We are actually hearing of resorts in Northern Ontario doing pretty robust business. And so we think that destinations people can drive to, we think will do quite well. So again, some of the resorts in Ontario and also in markets like Banff and in the Rocky Mountains are already experiencing a pretty strong pickup. International travel, again, Conference Board's at 21. I think 23 is probably a more realistic timeline for international travel to return. So Again, just to summarize, we think hotel demand has already begun to improve. We think it'll be led by the leisure sector, followed by domestic business travel, and then possibly small groups. And we think international travel and large city groups will probably be amongst the last to recover. We do think there'll be some discounting by hotels in terms of the rates, just to get customers back, although I do know in some of the Ontario resorts, they've actually started to increase rates just based on the strong demand that they're seeing. And again, a lot of it just really relates to timing of the vaccine and consumer confidence. So some timelines that we see over the next few months. July, and that's actually changed, I believe now it's August for a tentative opening of the US border, and that will probably get pushed out again if COVID continues to spread. Air Transat will begin to resume some flights, and on July 31st, inbound international travel ban is set to expire. In August, Sunwing and Porter will resume flights. In Toronto in September, TIFF will actually be mainly, it'll mainly be a virtual event. And so that unfortunately will have a big impact on a lot of those downtown hotels, particularly the luxury hotels, which have always done extremely well through TIFF. Cruising from US ports, I think I'd said earlier October, so this date actually may have changed. And then business travel is expected to pick up again in September. But again, with the spread in the US, I think those dates are probably going to be pushed out. So again, the areas where we think we'll see a faster pickup, so domestic and drive-to markets, we think we'll see some recovery sooner. And I think Markham certainly falls into that category. And again, that Northeast market was actually outperforming other areas in the GTA. We think a lot of the demand will be leisure-oriented demand at this point. And suburban and highway markets, we think, will do better. Again, just more traffic on the roads. People may still want to travel, but they're reluctant to fly. So I think people would prefer to drive to Ottawa as opposed to getting on a plane. And we think economy and mid-scale hotels will do better in the near term, and along with the extended stay and limited service properties. And we think as well that, hotels that are successful promoting, their cleanliness and their procedures, we think will do well. Slower will be international and fly-to markets. So you can see those numbers for the GTA. Toronto airport market, has not been performing well. And in fact, a lot of hotels in that market were closed, and some of them still remain closed. Group markets, again, that applies primarily to downtown markets. So it's those big citywide conventions we think will take longer. Airport, luxury, and upscale hotels will be some of the later hotels to recover. And then hotels that are in markets like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, not only are they dealing with COVID, but they're just dealing with very weak underlying economic conditions because of oil. So we do see, and again, this is revenue per available room. This is our outlook. And so you can see here that 2020 will be a bad year for hotels, to put it mildly, but beginning to see recovery in 2021 and into 2022. And by 2023, we think that the markets will be more or less fully recovered. I did just want to talk a little bit about room supply, because that was an indicator of how well the market was doing. And so, we did see a lot of new hotel hotel projects being proposed or coming to market. And a lot of times that happens towards the tail end of the cycle. So you go through a period of very strong operating numbers, and then you begin to see more people getting active in the sector, whether it's lenders or investors. And then, you know, they get to a point where they're ready to go ahead with a project, and then we get a bit of a setback. And so that's what's happened here. I mean, the market was pretty healthy. We weren't expecting to see, you know, massive reductions to supply. Ontario probably led the pack in terms of new projects. So what we are seeing now is projects that are being actually postponed or delayed, in a couple of cases canceled outright. So that may not necessarily be a bad thing, because I think that will make it a little easier for the existing hotels in the market to recover. I think the last thing you need is, you know, more competition. In Markham, there really wasn't a lot proposed in terms of new builds. There were a couple of hotels proposed by JM Hospitality on Woodbine Avenue, which actually would have complemented their other hotels. And those projects, I think, are very well positioned, and I would think will move forward. Beyond that, you know, there really wasn't a significant amount of new supply in the Markham area. A couple of other things that we're seeing, which I think help hotels, are we're seeing a lot of Airbnb room product come out of the market. So a lot of those are owned by smaller individual investors. And so because they're unable to rent those rooms, a lot of them have put them back in the monthly rental pool. So again, you know, hoteliers have not been very pleased with the impact of Airbnb on the hotel industry. So Airbnb hotels coming out of supply, I think is a positive development for hotels. The other thing too, I think to bear in mind is that I think from a consumer standpoint, hotels are able to offer you know, cleaning standards, and I think you can be well assured that they're taking COVID very seriously, and that the rooms have been cleaned and are safe to occupy. I think with Airbnb, it's a little more difficult just because of the ownership structure. It's small individual owners. You know, depending on where you stay, it can be, you know, a great experience, or it may not be that great. I think with hotels, one of the things that they do offer is consistency, and I think that's something that consumers will look for going forward. So I think that's definitely a plus for hotels. I think we may see some hotels come out of supply. Again, this wouldn't apply in the Markham area, but in Toronto, for example, and in other markets, large urban markets, we have seen where hotels have been bought by municipalities. So part of that is just to meet their social housing needs. And so where there's an older hotel, maybe the location isn't quite right anymore. A hotel is an attractive alternative. As opposed to building a purpose-built facility, buying a hotel is actually a good solution. And we have seen that in some municipalities across the country. So just some takeaways. So as I mentioned, the hotel sector performed very well, finished 2019 very strongly in, you know, with record occupancy and average rate. New hotel supply was added, including in the Markham area. A couple of terrific hotels were added in Markham to support the economic expansion in that area. And as I mentioned, the two hotels on Woodbine Avenue, those hotels will, I think, do very well and will continue to support that expansion in the Markham area. COVID-19, the impact is devastating for hotels. I can tell you that there are very few hotels that will generate a positive net income this year, and that's before payment of debt service. Unfortunately, there are still bills to pay, and Hoteliers have been, it's been led to a bit of a cash crunch for a lot of people. There has been a very good support from the government through their various loan and wage subsidy programs, and those have been tremendously helpful. And a lot of lenders have also provided support to the industry. So whether it's through, mainly through deferral of payments or postponement of interest, and a lot of hotels got extensions of 3 to 6 months. Unfortunately, I think this crisis is going to continue well into next year. And so I think it's important for that support to continue from government and from the lending community. I think without that, it's going to be very challenging for a lot of hoteliers to survive through the recovery. I was going to mention the Canadian Hotel Association has done a terrific job for the industry and are great advocates. And so if you're a hotelier, hopefully you're in touch with HAC, and I think HAC have some excellent resources for hoteliers. We're confident that the market will recover. This market has always recovered. We've been through 9/11, SARS, we've been through economic recessions, and I am confident that the business will return. It will take a little longer though. This will be a 2 to 3 year process. And some segments of the business may take even slightly longer. Nobody can really predict the speed or strength of the recovery. There's always a range of opinions, and ours is another opinion, but I think looking at history is always a good way to assess where we are. And last but not least, if you know anybody in the hotel business, hotel owners and investors are highly entrepreneurial. They are not risk adverse. They're innovative, they're adaptable, and that's another reason why we think the industry will come back. I put a picture of Nav Bhatia there. I don't know if you know Nav, but he's a terrific person, and you know what? I just wanted to put him on there because he's just such a positive influence on people. And I don't know if you know, but one of the things Nav's been doing is going out and delivering meals to frontline workers at old age homes and hospitals across the city. So I just wanted to finish on a positive note, and as the sign says, we will meet again. Anyway, thank you for that, listening to the presentation. I hope it was informative, and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I think we all need to hear these positive messages, and ending, I think, on that note is really helpful despite a lot of the challenges for this industry in particular. I think what we'll do is just quickly welcome Councillor Alan Ho, who is the chair of our Economic Development and Culture Committee, just to perhaps. Hello, Councillor. Maybe we could start us off on the Q&A and say a couple of comments. In the meantime, I'm inviting everyone to use the chat function to submit your questions. Over to you, Councillor Ho.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian, for your presentation. And well, as everybody knows that the hotel industry has been impacted so much. So I look forward to seeing a turnaround in the very near future. Thank you.
Great. Thanks,
Yeah,
Councillor.
we hope so too.
So we had a couple of questions come in regarding events. And I think some of us around the room, certainly the City of Markham in partnership with some other organizations, are planning some larger events in 2021 involving some international guests. And we're wondering what advice you would have for us in terms of sort of decision-making, contingency planning as we move forward.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. As I mentioned, a lot of it really depends on, you know, I think finding a vaccine and the distribution of the vaccine. I think until then, I think it's going to be challenging, you know, for people to travel. So until that happens, we will still have limits on group sizes. We will still have social distancing. We will still have all those protocols. And so I know, for example, there's a hotel conference in Calgary at the end of November, and that they actually just sent a questionnaire out to people who had signed up asking, would you attend? Under what circumstances would you attend? Would you be interested in doing, a virtual conference? So, those are the kind of questions I would be asking, I think. I do think that when we get to the end of 2020, I think there will be a lot more clarity around the recovery. I think right now we're just in very early stages, and so it's really difficult to say, but certainly any events in 2020, I think, are pretty much, I think it's going to be very difficult to run those. In the middle to latter part of 21, probably has a better than even chance of happening, but I just think it's something you got to monitor, and again, maybe a survey is not a bad idea just to get a feedback on, how the attendees feel about it.
Great. You mentioned, thank you, Brian. You mentioned earlier as well in terms of the importance of, or the impact of COVID on the hotel industry lasting well beyond 2020 into 2021. And despite some of the programs that have been in place, maybe coming to an end at some point during 2021, do you think the investor community is sort of has an appetite to extend some of the favorable sort of terms that they've been negotiating with the hotels? Do you think that there's going to be a continuing support from the investor community?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, from the investor standpoint, yes. I think it's really the lenders that are very much, in a pivotal position here. And obviously they have their own rules and regulations that they have to follow. I have a good friend who's a CFO of one of the large hotel companies, and he was saying that, look, this industry has been performed well, and people have done very well by it. Even lenders. I mean, lenders typically get a premium on the rates they charge lending against hotels, and it's not a matter of are you going to get paid? It's really more a matter of when are you going to get paid. And because, we're all quite confident that the industry will recover. But, I think until next year, they're going to be in very difficult straits. I think next year they'll probably get back to a point where they can begin to make payments, but it's going to last a few more months where they're going to need that added support.
We've got a question that's come in, and it goes as follows. Canada has been able to get a better handle on the COVID-19 crisis, unlike our neighbors to the south. We're extremely dependent on US travel that drives demand to the hotels in Canada. And when do you think the Canadian border will be able to reopen? Tell us, Brian, your crystal ball.
Yeah, it's going to be a while. Personally, I would be surprised if it opens this year. I think 2020, I think I think it's going to be a tough year. And I just don't see it. I mean, I think with the rate of spread in the US and, in areas like California, Texas, Florida, it's going to be very difficult, I think. So I would be surprised, actually, if it does reopen before the end of the year.
We had another question come in from our deputy mayor, and that's from a city point of view, looking at what we could be doing as a municipality to try to assist our local hotels. Any advice for us?
I think, the best thing you can do is any, marketing and promotion that you're already doing, I think, is certainly helpful. Christina, you had mentioned about the city promoting more sports and group events. I think that type of promotion will certainly help. And to the extent there is business that you know of, drive it to the hotels. So I think any promotion you can do and any reassurances you can give travelers, I think will help. Absolutely.
That's helpful. Thank you. Another question came in regarding the recovery of Airbnb as opposed to the hotel industry, and how is Airbnb sort of in your mind wondering what the public sentiment is around their level of comfort and confidence? And you alluded to this earlier in terms of the health and safety staying in an Airbnb versus hotels. Has there been any look at that?
Yeah, and I don't want to denigrate Airbnb. I mean, I've used them myself, and it's a good experience for the most part. I just think that people are going to be a lot more conscious of, standards at hotels. So, when you go, you want to be assured that, that there are cleaning protocols, that the room has been deep cleaned, that, and so, certainly hotels like chains like Marriott and Hilton and Choice Hotels and a number of the others, have gone to a great extent to develop those programs. They've partnered with, outside companies to develop those protocols. And so I think from a consumer standpoint, I mean, I'm certainly a lot more comfortable, I think, knowing that they've made those efforts and they're implementing those standards, as opposed to an Airbnb, which, really, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they're implementing their own standards, but, because of the ownership structure, it's a lot more difficult to enforce those standards and to make sure that they're being implemented.
So it may end up being that, and again, I guess it's difficult to predict, but just following that logic, and I agree with you, from a consumer standpoint, I would sort of feel the same way. The level of confidence a visitor would have in an established hotel versus Airbnb in terms of the health and safety standards and procedures may work in favor, I guess, of the hotels in terms of consumer preference.
I think so. And the hotels are going to make a great effort to promote that as well. I mean, one of the strengths of being affiliated with a major chain is that you've got a tremendous marketing machine behind you. And so you look at the profile of hotels in Markham, whether they're Marriott or Hilton or, Sheraton or, some of the others, those names carry a lot of weight with consumers.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we do have excellent variety of hotels and excellent quality of hotels in Markham.
Yes.
And we're working really closely with them through our Destination Markham initiatives, and some of the representatives are on the line today. I think
I apologize if I leave anybody out.
Oh, no worries.
Choice Hotels, I mean, they're terrific. Sandman, I think you've got a Sandman coming. They're also good operators. And Park Inn, I know, over on by the 404 as well. So I mean, they all do a good job.
What we were talking about before we started the webinar too was just the large cluster of technology companies, as well as financial services, other types of companies, and many multinationals that are US based, with a strong and growing presence in Markham, and the impact that has on our local tourism industry, in that I believe it's about 70% of the overnight stays are due to business travel.
Yes.
And a large part of that being from the US, with the border being closed and now that extension potentially till the end of the year, that will impact our business here in Markham quite substantially. Are there other is there some pivoting that those hotels could be doing in Markham in terms of other opportunities, other business lines that they could be pursuing?
Yeah, again, I think, if you look at the areas where we think there'll be quicker recovery, leisure is certainly one of them. So, whether it's people coming to Toronto to visit, I think, we do have some strong demand generators in the north part of the city and northeast, and promoting those, right? So I think that's probably the most readily accessible market segment right now, I think, is that drive-to traffic or drive-by traffic and leisure. And to your point, sports groups, I mean, I don't think tournaments and things have returned at this point, but I think as well, we probably will begin to see a little bit of pickup on some social events as well as the group sizes increase. I know one of the things we're looking for is, with so many events canceled earlier in the year, weddings and things like that, some of those are coming back, but in a much smaller format. And so I think there could be some demand in those areas as well.
Great, thank you. That's great insight. I don't see other questions coming in, and we are nearing the end of our, actually here are a couple of other questions.
Okay.
Well, maybe we'll end up with another question by Deputy Mayor Hamilton. What would you tell a local developer who has indicated an intent to build a new boutique hotel here in Markham?
What we're seeing from some of our clients is, depending where they are in the development process, we have seen a number of cases where they are just maybe slowing down the process a little bit. Candidly, I think a lot of people just think that, if this recovery is going to be 2 or 3 years, then, why would I be in a rush to open it up next year? And I totally agree with that logic. I mean, I just don't know why you would. We do know situations where, developers were already in the ground and opening up a hotel, but it's not a good experience, right, when the market is the way it is. So I think for someone who's in the planning stages, I think a boutique hotel would be great in Markham, but again, I probably wouldn't rush to open it next year. So maybe it's a 22 or 23 opening instead.
Great, thank you. And I see that Councillor Ho has a question he'd like to ask.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. My question is about tourist infrastructure. Because, a lot of people, have got stuck in their own place, for a long time during this pandemic. So after the pandemic, I believe that, a lot of people would like to, go abroad or to travel, that kind of thing. So my question is, well, just look at, your the picture, on the screen, talking about Niagara Falls is, one of the world's wonders.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, exactly. And in fact, I have a lot of friends, they would like, to visit Canada. Compared with many countries, Canada is one of the best countries to visit because, they don't want to go to many countries, nowadays, just like, USA or a lot of European countries, they have not controlled the pandemic, properly. So
sure.
That's a good news. However, they always said that every time, in fact, most of my friends, came to Canada for 5 or 6 times before, but they seldom, thought of coming to Markham. Every time, they went to Niagara Falls to visit, CN Tower, to have, a city tour, in Toronto. And most of them, they only, came to visit Markham, once,
Yeah.
So in that case, I would like to have, your opinion. What kind of, infrastructure we need to have in order to attract more foreign visitors, and at the same time, it's not, a big job. It's not expensive, not like the Niagara Falls, but of course, not like CN Tower. It's too much. But what kind of thing we can do in order to enhance our tourist industry?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Not an easy answer. I mean, we always look at demand generators. So, what are the demand generators in a particular market? And, candidly, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Northeast market, we don't really see a lot of, demand generators outside of, I mean, as Christina mentioned, very, very strong business community, which drives 70% of your room demand. I mean, Markham, I think up until this year, was performing, 70% plus occupancy, and rates were going up. So, you know, relatively speaking, I mean, Markham is already one of the better markets, I think, in the GTA. I think what hoteliers want is, and I'm sure most of them would tell you that, you know, most of the year they're pretty busy from Monday to Thursday. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of hotels in that market are running more or less at capacity. So, you know, what the hotels need to do is figure out, how do we fill, you know, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday? And so that really is the question from a hotel perspective. Tourism, I'm not as conversant in that. I think tourism, you've got to have the attractions to bring people in. You know, whether it's something like a Canada's Wonderland, or, you know, Durham Live now is going in out in Pickering. You know, those are, you know, significant attractions. But I think from a hotel perspective, it's really, the key is really to capture that demand Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I think the way you do that is through leisure, and it's through groups. It's getting the sports teams in and filling those rooms over the weekends.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's an excellent way. And thank you, Councillor Ho, for a great question. I wanted to thank all the participants for joining us today. We are at the end of our hour here. Thank you to Brian for a great presentation. I thought it was really insightful, and hopefully everyone else on the phone took away some not only latest trends, but an idea of how this industry is moving forward. And before we end, I also wanted to just put in a quick plug for our next webinar, which is taking place on Friday at 10 a.m. And it's a partnership with Digital Main Streets, and specifically focusing on the Shop Here program, which is meant to help small businesses. So those businesses employing less than 10 people, not-for-profits are also eligible for it, as well as individual artists. And the whole point of the program is to provide assistance, one-on-one kind of assistance, to help businesses increase their online sales. And there's some excellent partnerships, Google being one of them, and Facebook ads. And for 3 months, you get a whole suite of free services and advice. And so at this time, you know, with so many of our businesses that fall into that category, they also fall into the tourism and hospitality industry category. And so I think it's going to be really important that as many of our Markham businesses avail themselves of this type of assistance, and so that they can bridge themselves through this very difficult time. So it's at 10 a.m. If you want to learn more and to register, visit markhambusiness.eventbrite.ca, and we'll send the link out at the end with a copy of Brian's presentation to everyone who participated today. So thank you again. Thank you. Regional Councillor Lee also joined us while we were in the middle of the session. Again, to both the Vice Chair and Chair of our Economic Development and Culture Committee, Councillor Alan Ho and Khalid Usman, and our Deputy Mayor for participating today, and to everyone on the line. And thank you, Sandra, as well. It was really great use of our time. And Brian, we appreciate your assistance and your insights.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All the best, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.